Billionaire bought the cafe to fire everyone, until he heard what the waitress said to a child. No one at the little corner cafe knew who the man in the dark suit really was when he walked in that Tuesday morning. He looked out of place, like a storm cloud that had wandered into a patch of sunlight. The regulars noticed his polished shoes, his expensive watch, the sharpness of his silence. He ordered black coffee, didn't smile, and didn't look up when the waitress placed it on his table. But before the day ended, every person in that cafe, especially hers, would know his name. His name was Adrian Cole, billionaire investor, CEO of coal industries, a man who'd made his fortune turning family businesses into numbers on a spreadsheet, then erasing them when they stopped being profitable. And this cafe, Harper's, was next on his list. Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people. He hadn't wanted to come himself. His assistant had insisted he send someone else to handle the closure, some faceless executive with a briefcase and a rehearsed apology. But something about this place had bothered him. The cafe had been losing money for years, yet the owner refused to sell. So Adrian decided to see it with his own eyes before signing the final papers. He didn't expect the smell of cinnamon and coffee beans to hit him like a memory he didn't want to remember. He didn't expect the sound of quiet laughter, the clinking of mugs, or the warmth of a place untouched by the coldness of profit. And he definitely didn't expect her. She came to his table with a pad and pen, her apron slightly wrinkled, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid. "Morning, sir. You're new here." Her name tag said Lila. Her smile wasn't rehearsed, it was kind. "I don't drink coffee for the company," Adrian said flatly. She didn't flinch. "Then you'll fit right in. Most of our regulars drink to survive their mornings, not improve them." He looked up, surprised by her quickness. There was no flattery in her tone, no nervousness. Just presence. She poured his coffee, then turned away to help a boy at the next table. The child, no more than 6, sat alone with a cup of milk and a worn backpack. Lila crouched down beside him. "Hey, champ, forgot your lunch again?" The boy nodded shyly. "Mum said she'd try to come before school, but she had to work." Lila smiled softly. "Then it's on me today." She reached into her apron, took out a small wrapped muffin and slid it onto his plate. "This one's a secret mission muffin, okay? It's free if you promise to keep smiling until your mom gets here." The boy's face lit up. "Deal!" Adrian watched the exchange, something tightening in his chest. He didn't understand it. The gentle way she spoke, the warmth in her eyes when she looked at the child. He'd spent his life surrounded by people who measured everything in gain and loss. Here, she'd just given something away for nothing. When she came back, he spoke without thinking. "You shouldn't do that." She blinked. "Do what?" "Give food away." Her expression softened. "Then I guess you've never seen someone hungry before." He frowned. "I have. I just know pity doesn't pay the bills." She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Maybe not, but it keeps the world from going cold." For a moment, he didn't know what to say. He was used to silence being his weapon. Now it felt like her shield. When she walked away, he looked down at the papers in his briefcase, the contract for purchase, the closure notice, the signatures waiting for his pen. All the numbers aligned. Everything made sense, except the feeling in his chest that told him it didn't. He stayed longer than he meant to, watched the way she moved between tables, the way she treated every person as if they mattered. He didn't know what to call it. Compassion, naivete, weakness. Whatever it was, it irritated him and fascinated him. By noon, the cafe had quieted. Lila leaned against the counter, humming softly while refilling sugar jars. He stood and approached. "Who owns this place?" She glanced up. "Mr. Harper. He's been sick lately, though. Why?" "I'm thinking of buying it." She raised an eyebrow. "You? You don't look like someone who drinks diner coffee." "I don't," he said, "but I buy things. It's what I do." Her smile faded slightly. "What happens after you buy them?" "I fix what's broken." Her eyes narrowed. "And if it's not broken?" He hesitated. "Then I make it better." She nodded slowly, though there was something wary in her gaze. "Places like this don't always need fixing, you know. Sometimes they just need people to care enough to keep them alive." He wanted to tell her she was wrong. That business didn't work that way. But he couldn't. Not while the air between them felt heavy with something he didn't recognize. When he left that afternoon, he told himself he wouldn't come back. That this was just another transaction, another number. But that night, sitting alone in his glass penthouse, the silence felt sharper than usual. The city glittered below, but it all seemed empty, mechanical. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger. He thought of her, the sound of her voice, the way she'd looked at that child, the defiance in her calmness. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he poured himself a drink and muttered into the quiet, "She'll understand when it's done." The next morning, the staff of Harper's Café arrived to find a black car parked outside. Inside, a man in a tailored suit waited at a corner table, papers neatly stacked beside his coffee. Lila froze when she saw him. "Good morning," Adrian said calmly, as though he'd never left. "I'm here on behalf of Coal Industries." "What for?" she asked, already knowing the answer. He met her eyes, his tone steady, unfeeling. "To finalize the purchase. This cafe will close by the end of the week." The room went silent. She stared at him, the same man who'd watched her feed a child, who'd said nothing but listened anyway, and saw nothing but steel in his eyes now. But before she could speak, a small voice came from behind the counter. The same little boy from yesterday stood there, clutching his backpack, looking confused. "Miss Lila, why are you crying?" She hadn't realized she was. Adrian turned toward the boy, and something in his chest cracked open, because what she said next would change everything. The boy's question cracked the room open. Lila wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, knelt so her eyes were level with his, and rested a steady palm on the scuffed table where he'd been tracing circles in spilled milk. "Hey," she said, voice warm but sure. "Do you know what this place is?" He shook his head. "It's a promise," Lila said. "It's where people come before they're ready for the day, and we help them be brave enough to face it. And do you know the rule about promises?" He frowned, thinking. "You don't break them." "That's right," she smiled, small and real. "Even when grown-ups make mistakes, even when important people think numbers are more important than faces, we don't break promises. We find a way to fix them." The boy's shoulders uncurled. "So it won't close." Lila glanced up, straight into the cold blade of Adrian's gaze, and answered without flinching. "Not if I can help it, champ." Something unfamiliar pressed under Adrian's ribs. He had prepared for fury, protest, pleading. He knew how to outweight those. He had not prepared for a lesson given softly to a child that landed like a verdict in his own chest. The moment shattered when Maya, another waitress with bangs and quick hands, burst from the kitchen, flour dusting her sleeves. "Harper's on the phone," she whispered to Lila, urgent. "He heard about everything?" Lila squeezed the boy's shoulder. "Miss Maya's got you. Secret mission muffin, round 2. She stood and went to the old rotary hanging by the pantry door. The cafe's hum kept on. A spoon clinked. Someone laughed a little too loudly in defense against sorrow. The bell above the door sighed in the draft. Adrian's legal counsel. Victor Lang slid into the chair opposite him, placing a leather folder between them. "Documents are prepped. Mr. Cole, your signature and we're done. Vacate notice goes out at close of business." Adrian looked past Victor, at Lila's back, at the way she braced one hand against the wall, as if steadying the whole building through her palm. "Mr. Harper," she said into the phone, gentle and low. "Breathe, I know. I'm here." Pause. "No, don't come down." "Your doctor said—" Another pause. "Then listen to me. We don't drown. We float till the wave passes. You taught me that, remember?" She smiled, and it softened the whole room. "Yes, I promise." She hung up, inhaled like it hurt, and turned. When her eyes met Adrian's again, the softness was gone. What replaced it was calm as a surgeon's hands. "Outside," she said to him. "5 minutes." Victor arched a brow. "We don't negotiate with staff." "Then consider this charity," Lila replied. Already moving toward the side door, Adrian followed, because something in him already had. Out in the narrow alley behind the cafe, rain left glittering threads on the brick. A milk crate served as a stool. A rusted fire escape stitched the walls together. Lila folded her arms, her braid damp at the ends. "You're buying us to erase us," she said without preface. "Why?" "Because the numbers are irredeemable." He kept his voice even. "The lease is untenable. Location is valuable. A mixed-use development would employ more people and—" "You'll employ ghosts," she cut in. "This isn't a line item. It's a living room with a coffee machine. You take it, you don't build, you vacuum." He stared at her, caught both off guard and pinned. "Thou thinks sentiment can float payroll. I think decency stops a city from going septic. She tipped her chin toward the door. That little boy is Theo. His mom cleans offices at your tower at night and checks him in here at dawn because she can't afford childcare. Maya covers a rent hike because Mr. Harper refused to cut her hours when she asked for mornings to take her dad to dialysis. We survive because we pass kindness around like a plate. Your math misses that. Kindness doesn't pay the landlord. No, she said, a hard light behind her eyes. But your name could. The air thinned. There it is. There what is. The pitch, he said, a smile cut from frost. You want me to be a patron saint so you can keep brewing nostalgia. Lila, I don't want your sainthood. She stepped closer. I want 30 days. Time to show you why this place matters with ledgers that aren't written in sugar and tears. I'll open the books. You bring your accountants. Come every morning, see what we do. If by day 30 you still think this is a bad idea, fine. Post your notice. But don't turn a promise into rubble because the spreadsheet doesn't speak fluent human. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried weight because it refused to beg. Adrian found himself saying, before he knew he'd decided it, 10 days, 30, 14, he counted, more out of habit than conviction. Her mouth tilted. 21, he almost smiled. You negotiate like a shark in a sundress, like someone with a family, she replied. And this staff is mine. Something in that word family knocked against a door in him he'd nailed shut years ago, the alley filled with the rattle of rain. A woman in a pale maid's uniform rounded the corner, hair damp, eyes wide. She stopped dead when she saw Adrian. Mr. Cole? Lila turned. Anna, she exhaled in relief, going to her. Theo's inside, he's okay. Anna Morales clutched her tote. I ran on my break when Maya called. They said the cafe. She looked between them, flustered. Sir, I clean the 32nd floor at Cole Tower. I know I shouldn't ask you, but he does his homework here in the mornings before school. Please don't take this away. Adrian's reply lodged in his throat. He had memorized the phrase for moments like this. We value the community, but decisions must be made for long-term viability. It wouldn't come. Lila watched him, not triumphantly, not pleading, measuring. Victor appeared at the alley mouth, umbrella like a shield. Mr. Cole, the seller's attorney, is on the line. They're ready. We're not, Lila said. She touched Anna's shoulder. Take a breath. Go see Theo. Anna nodded, wiped her eyes, and slipped inside. Lila faced Adrian again. 21 days, she said softly. If we fail, I'll hand you the keys myself. Lila, Victor cut in crisp, you're a waitress. You don't hand over keys you don't own. She didn't look away from Adrian as she reached into her apron and pulled out a folded paper in a plastic sleeve. No, she said, but I hold this. Victor's scoff died when he read the header. What is an addendum, Lila said. Drafted with Mr. Harper last year when his health turned. He knew buyers like you would come when the books turned red. He made me learn every line until I could recite it when he forgot. She handed it to Adrian. The paper was old, edges softened by handling. The language was uncompromising. Community Continuity Covenant. Any purchaser of the property at 117 Willow Street agrees to maintain the location as a public cafe for no less than 12 months from transfer. Retain current staff at existing wages or above. Preserve the daily breakfast program for minors and seniors at reduced cost. And cede day-to-day operations to a named steward during the term. Breach will void the sale and transfer title to the named steward upon certification by a neutral arbiter. Below, in a firm, wobbling script, Steward Lila Arden-Reyes. Adrian read it twice, then a third time, because the legal muscle of it was undeniable, because his team should have caught this, because somewhere under the legal steel, he felt something like admiration flare and choose to live. Victor's phone buzzed frantic in his palm. Mr. Cole, this is irregular. It's binding, Adrian said, eyes still on the paper. Victor swallowed. We can fight it. Argue unconscionability. Lila's gaze didn't blink. Fight it, and you'll spend more than you would ever save, in court and in whatever part of your soul hasn't been sold yet. He looked up at her. You crafted this. Harper wrote it, she said. I told him what mattered. Lunches for kids, he said low. Wages for staff. And a steward who can say no to you, she added. Steadily, his phone exploded. Messages from the board, from Victor's firm, from a news alert that his car had been seen outside the cafe. The machine had woken up, hungry. He handed the covenant back to her. He felt the weight of the pen in his pocket like a dare. 21 days, he said. A breath he hadn't known he was holding left her. We'll show you. We'll see, he replied, though the words didn't carry their old armor. They stepped back into the cafe together. The room noticed them, the way rooms do when they sense their future entering. Theo sat at a table drawing a dragon that looked suspiciously like a coffee machine. Anna had her hands wrapped around a mug, like it was heat and hope at once. Adrian looked at the faces that were suddenly, inconveniently human. He looked at Lila, whose braid was fraying and whose eyes had the steadiness of a lighthouse, and for the first time in years, the man who bought places to erase them found himself wanting to learn how not to destroy. Victor murmured at his shoulder, urgent. Sir, we need your decision now. With that covenant, if you proceed, you're effectively appointing her to run a business under your name for a year. Adrian's gaze flicked to the covenant again, to the line that snagged him. Transfer title to the named steward upon breach. He imagined the board's faces. He imagined Wall Street's headlines. He imagined Lila's hand on a child's small shoulder, steadying a morning. His pen hovered over the closing packet. Before we sign, he said, voice quiet but carrying. I want to see the ledgers. Tomorrow at dawn, Lila answered. No, he met her eyes. Right now. She studied him, then nodded, already moving behind the counter toward the office. Toward the records that told the truth her eyes had been telling all morning. As she reached for the light, a shadow moved in the doorway. A frail man in a coat that hung wrong on him stood there, eyes bright and stubborn. Mr. Harper, Maya gasped. The old owner smiled at Lila, then at Adrian. I may be dying, he rasped, but I'm not dead enough to miss the day a shark learns to swim in shallow water. He lifted a trembling hand and held out a key. Lila, if he signs it wrong, you know what to do. Adrian stared at the key. The room held its breath. His phone buzzed again. Board, do not sign with covenant. He looked at Lila's outstretched hand, at the covenant waiting like a line in the sand. He had money. He had power. For the first time in his life, he also had a choice that could make him more than those. And as his pen tipped toward ink, someone in the doorway said, very quietly, Mr. Cole, if you sign that paper, you won't just save a cafe, you'll start a war. The word war hung in the air like the aftershock of thunder. Everyone in the cafe went still. Maya froze mid-pour. The boy Theo clutched his pencil, and even the espresso machine seemed to stop hissing. Adrian turned toward the voice. A tall man in a grey suit stood framed in the doorway, water dripping from his coat, a security badge from Coal Industries gleaming on his lapel. Beside him stood two others, both silent, both watching. Who are you? Lila asked, her tone cautious but unafraid. The man smiled thinly. Patrick Reeve, head of acquisitions. Technically, that makes me Mr. Cole's shadow. Adrian's jaw tightened. I didn't call you. No, Patrick said smoothly, but the board did. You've been quiet, Adrian. Too quiet. We got nervous. He turned his gaze toward Lila, letting it linger a moment too long. So this is the problem. Lila met his stare evenly. If by problem you mean a group of people trying to keep their jobs, then yes. We're quite the menace. Patrick's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're clever. That's good. Clever people are easier to predict. Adrian stepped between them. But you're out of line, Reeve. Am I? Patrick said, his voice turning sharp. Because what I see is the CEO of a billion-dollar company standing in a failing diner, hesitating to do his job because a waitress made him feel guilty. Lila's breath caught, but she didn't speak. Adrian's tone dropped to ice. Leave. I will, Patrick said. But the board won't. You've got 24 hours to sign the papers without that covenant, or they'll initiate a motion to remove you. Victor looked as if he might be sick. Adrian, I heard him, Adrian said. Patrick gave a small, satisfied nod. Good, and Mr. Cole? Adrian didn't answer. Patrick glanced once more at Lila. Don't get too comfortable, Miss Reyes, she said. He smirked. Right, Miss Reyes. Enjoy your last day of employment. He left, the door slamming behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain outside filled the silence. Then Maya exhaled shakily. What just happened? Adrian rubbed a hand over his face. Politics. Lila stepped closer, her eyes searching his. You just risked everything for this place. He laughed once bitterly. No, I just realized what it costs to have everything. She studied him, the exhaustion behind his composure, the fracture lines forming where arrogance used to live. Then maybe it's time you stop fighting like you have nothing to lose. Her words landed softly but stayed. Later, when the cafe emptied, Adrian sat alone at a corner table, staring out at the rain. He didn't notice Lila cleaning nearby until she spoke. You didn't have to stand up to him. He looked at her. Yes, I did. She tilted her head. Why? He hesitated. Because he reminded me of who I used to be. Lila leaned on the counter. And who was that? A man who only saw people as investments, profits, threats. Sounds lonely. He gave a humorless smile. It was effective. Until it wasn't. That silence again, heavy, charged, fragile. Finally, she said quietly, You can still walk away, you know. Let them close us. Keep your company. Keep your power. He met her eyes. And go back to what I was? She said nothing. She didn't need to. He stood, slid his hands into his pockets and said, You said I have 21 days. Make me believe it's worth it. She smiled, not in victory but in quiet gratitude. Then come early tomorrow. We open at 6. He nodded once and left, the bell above the door echoing long after he was gone. That night he didn't go home. He drove without purpose, the city lights reflecting off his windshield like shattered stars. The word war kept repeating in his mind. Not between him and Lila, not even between him and the board. It was the one inside himself. The next morning he arrived before dawn. The cafe lights were already on, spilling warmth onto the wet pavement. Through the glass he saw Lila arranging fresh pastries. She looked up, surprised to see him so early. You weren't kidding, he said, stepping inside. I told you we start at 6, she replied, handing him an apron. He frowned. What's this? Research, she said simply. For the next few hours, the billionaire who owned skyscrapers learned how to wipe tables, pour coffee, and greet regulars by name. He burned his hand twice, dropped a muffin, and received polite applause from a group of retirees when he finally managed to balance 3 plates at once. And somewhere between laughter and exhaustion, he realized something strange. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about margins or mergers. He was present. By midday, he sat behind the counter with a towel draped around his neck. Lila poured him a coffee. Not bad for a first day, she said. I don't know how you do this every morning. You get used to people, she said. Once you realize they're not transactions. He smiled faintly. You're still angry at me. I'm not, she said. I just haven't decided if you're here to save us or yourself. That silence again, honest, dangerous. Then the door opened, and a small figure darted in. Theo. He waved at Lila, then spotted Adrian and grinned. You work here now? Adrian chuckled. Something like that. The boy climbed onto a stool. Can I get my secret mission muffin? On one condition, Lila said. You share half with your new friend. Theo giggled and handed half the muffin to Adrian. And in that small, ridiculous moment, sugar crumbs and coffee steam between them, Adrian felt something inside him shift. He didn't know what to call it, but he knew this. It was the first time in a very long time that saving something felt better than owning it. He just didn't know yet that someone was watching from across the street. A man with an umbrella and a camera, sending photos to the board with the caption, Your CEO is cleaning tables. By noon, the photo had made its way into 3 inboxes, and by 2 o'clock, half the board had seen it. The image was simple. Adrian Cole, billionaire CEO of coal industries, wiping down a cafe table while a waitress smiled beside him. But the caption beneath it was poison. He's compromised, emotionally entangled with the acquisition target. That evening, the board meeting was called without warning. Adrian walked into the marble conference room, still smelling faintly of coffee and cinnamon. His reflection in the black glass table looked less like a tycoon and more like a man who hadn't slept. Patrick Reeve was waiting. Well, Patrick said smoothly, sliding a printed photo across the table. I'll give you this, Adrian. You've finally gone viral for something human. Adrian didn't sit. Oh, you called this meeting to embarrass me. To save you, Patrick corrected. And the company. The market's already whispering about this cafe stunt. Investors think you've lost focus. The press loves a redemption arc. Until they remember they're supposed to root for profit, Adrian's jaw tightened. You think one photograph changes who I am? Patrick leaned back. No, Adrian, you changed. That's the problem. The room murmured in agreement. Faces that had once smiled at his success now looked at him with the polite pity reserved for men who'd lost their edge. You bought that cafe, Patrick continued, to dissolve an unprofitable asset. Instead, you're running it like a charity. You're giving interviews to no one, ignoring our calls and fraternizing with employees. That isn't leadership. That's sentimentality. Adrian's voice was low, steady. Maybe that's exactly what this company needs. Patrick's smile faltered. You think compassion pays dividends? I think humanity prevents collapse. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through glass. When the meeting ended, Adrian knew what would come next. The board would circle, whisper, plan, but for now he still held control, and something in him was done apologizing for feeling alive. That night, he drove back to the cafe. Lila was closing up, counting the register by the soft glow of the pendant lights. She looked up when she heard the bell. You're late, she said. I didn't know I had a curfew. She smiled faintly. You do now. Staff rule, he chuckled, walking closer. Do you always make the rules? Only the ones that keep people kind. He leaned against the counter. Does that work? Sometimes, she said, when they listen. He watched her in silence, the soft rhythm of her hands moving across the counter. There was no artifice in her, no mask. Just a woman trying to hold something good together in a world that kept breaking it apart. Finally, he said quietly, You were right. About what? Promises. She looked up. What about them? They don't break, he said. They bend until they hurt, but they don't break. Something in her expression softened. You've been thinking about that? Too much. Lila studied him for a long moment. You look tired. Board meeting, he said. They think I've lost my mind. Have you? He smiled faintly. Maybe, but it feels better than being heartless. She said nothing, but her silence was warm, not distant. Theo's laugh echoed from the corner booth. His mother had come to pick him up, but the boy was insisting on finishing his drawing. Lila glanced at them, smiling. You know what that is? She said. He followed her gaze. A dragon. Apparently it's a dragon who protects this cafe. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Does it breathe fire or coffee steam? Both, she said. And he laughed, really laughed, and for the first time in months. The sound startled him. He looked at her. You're dangerous, you know that? She smiled. Because I make you laugh? No, he said softly. Because you make me want to stay. The words came out before he could stop them. For a second, neither moved. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Then Lila broke eye contact, busying herself with the register. You don't belong here, Adrian. Maybe not, he said. But I don't belong anywhere else either. She closed the till and looked at him again, her eyes shining in the soft light. You can't build your redemption on someone else's survival. You're not here to save me. Maybe not, he said quietly. Maybe I'm here because you saved me first. The air between them felt fragile, a truth neither of them could carry, yet neither could drop. Outside, the city lights flickered through the rain-streaked windows, painting them in gold and blue. Lila reached up, turning off the last light above the counter. We open again at 6, he nodded. I'll be here. She hesitated at the door. You don't have to keep proving something to me. I'm not, he said. I'm proving it to myself. Her hand rested on the doorknob, the light catching the silver bracelet at her wrist. Then make sure what you're fighting for is more than a headline. When she left, the bell above the door chimed softly, fading into the night. Adrian stood in the dark cafe for a long time, the smell of coffee still lingering in the air, the sound of her voice replaying in his mind. But outside, across the street, Patrick Reeve watched from a parked car. He closed his phone after sending another message. Board message, he's not backing down. Time to take the cafe from him. And as the rain blurred the neon lights, Patrick smiled to himself. He'd just declared a war of his own. The next morning, the cafe was quieter than usual. The regulars who usually filled the air with chatter and laughter seemed subdued, whispering over their coffee cups. Lila sensed it the moment she walked in. Something had shifted. Maggie, the older cook who'd been with the cafe for over a decade, met her by the counter. You didn't hear? She asked softly. Hear what? Maggie held out a folded newspaper. The headline struck Lila like a punch to the chest. Coal Industries to close historic café. New project breaks ground next month. She read it twice before the words sank in. "No," she whispered. "That can't be right." "It came from the top," Maggie said. Patrick Reeves' name was all over the announcement. Lila's pulse quickened. Adrian wouldn't. He couldn't. After everything he'd said, everything he'd shown, it didn't make sense. But when she looked out the window, she saw a black car pull up. The kind with tinted glass and no warmth inside. Adrian stepped out. He was dressed sharply. The same perfection she'd seen the first day, an immaculate suit, crisp shirt, every detail controlled. But his eyes told another story. He looked as if he hadn't slept, and there was something fragile beneath his usual steel. The bell above the door chimed when he entered. The cafe froze. "Adrian," she said, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "Tell me this isn't true." He didn't answer right away. His silence was enough to make the room feel colder. Patrick went to the board, he finally said. They voted. The cafe's part of the redevelopment plan. They think it's the right move financially. "And what do you think?" He exhaled, looking away. I don't have a choice." Lila took a slow step forward. "You always have a choice." "You don't understand how this works," he said, his voice low, tired. "No," she said firmly. "I think you're the one who doesn't. Because you keep trading pieces of yourself for power you don't even want anymore." Her words landed deep. The staff exchanged glances, whispering nervously, but she didn't stop. "You came here because you wanted to feel human again. Because you saw something in this place. Something worth saving. And now you're just undoing it?" He closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tight. "It's not that simple." "It is," she said. "It's always that simple when it's about doing the right thing." Her voice broke on the last word. Adrian flinched, not from anger, but from the truth she refused to soften. Theo, the boy who often came in after school, watched from a corner booth. He clutched the little wooden dragon Adrian had bought him last week. The one Lila had told him was his guardian of kindness. The child stood up suddenly, walked to Adrian and held out the toy. "You can have it back," Theo said quietly. "You don't need to protect this place anymore." Adrian looked down at the small dragon in the boy's hand. Its paint chipped, one wing broken, and something inside him cracked. He crouched to meet the boy's eyes. "Who told you that?" "Mom did," Theo said softly. "She said sometimes people stop fighting when they get tired. But you look like someone who never quits." Adrian's throat tightened. He reached out slowly, closing Theo's hand back over the dragon. "You keep it," he said. "You'll need it more than I do." Lila turned away, blinking back tears. She didn't want him to see her cry, but Adrian saw anyway. The board had taken many things from him, as control, dignity, even trust. But what it couldn't take was the truth in her eyes. It was the one thing left that made him feel real. He wanted to explain, to tell her he hadn't approved the demolition himself, that Patrick had forced the deal through under the board's authority. But the words didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the hurt in her voice when she finally said, "I thought you were different." He stepped closer, lowering his tone. "I am trying, Lila." She looked at him, tears brimming. "So then try harder." The sound of a cup shattering broke the moment. Maggie had dropped a plate behind the counter, hands trembling. The noise jolted everyone back into motion. Adrian straightened his jacket, but his composure was gone. He looked at the people he'd come to know, the cook, the barista, the regulars, and realized they weren't just employees or numbers. They were the first real connections he'd made in years. He walked to the door without another word. The bell chimed again as he left, and this time it sounded like a farewell. Outside, the city swallowed him. But that night, in his penthouse overlooking the skyline, Adrian couldn't escape the sound of her voice. He poured himself a drink, but it tasted like regret. He stared at the reflection of the city lights in the glass and finally picked up his phone. He opened Patrick's message thread. "Adrian, you pushed the closure through without my consent, Patrick. The board backed it unanimously. Don't make this personal, Adrian. It already is, Patrick. Then you've lost." Adrian stared at the last message for a long time. Then he deleted it, grabbed his coat and left. The night air was sharp against his skin. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that he was done letting other men decide what his conscience was worth. He drove until the streets grew narrow, until the lights turned to shadows. He parked near the cafe and saw it through the window, dark, silent, still standing. Inside he could see Lila, sitting alone at one of the tables. She was sketching something on a napkin, her brow furrowed. He stood in the rain watching her for a moment he couldn't measure. Then slowly he crossed the street and reached for the door handle. But before he could enter, headlights flared behind him, a car pulling up fast. Patrick Reeves stepped out. "Don't," Patrick said calmly, lighting a cigarette under his umbrella. "If you go in there tonight, Adrian, you lose everything." Adrian met his gaze through the rain. "Then I guess I finally have something worth losing." And with that, he pushed the door open. Lila looked up when the door opened, startled to see him standing there, drenched from the rain. The cafe was closed. The lights dimmed except for the small lamp above her table. She blinked, as if unsure whether he was real or just another memory of disappointment come back to haunt her. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. Setting her pen down, Adrian's voice was steady, though his breath came uneven from the cold. "Neither should I have bought this place, apparently. But I did." He walked toward her, water dripping from his hair onto the floor. His suit was soaked, his tie undone. There was no trace of the corporate armor he'd worn that morning, just a man who looked as if he'd been fighting something invisible all day. Lila stood, her guard rising again. "If you came to justify what happened, I came to stop it," he interrupted. She froze. "Stop what?" "The closure. The demolition. All of it." She shook her head, not trusting herself to believe him. "You can't. Patrick already made the announcement. The contracts are signed. Then I'll tear them up." His tone carried no theatrics, only quiet conviction. "They might own the land, but I own the company that owns the land. And if they want a war over what's right, I'll give them one." Lila's chest tightened. Why are you doing this now?" He exhaled, looking at her the way a man looks at the truth he's been running from. "Because you were right. I forgot what this was all for. Somewhere between the money and the control, I lost the reason I ever started any of it. And then you looked at me, not like a billionaire, not like a savior, but like a man who could still be better." Her voice trembled. "You don't owe me redemption, Adrian." "I know," he said, "but I owe it to myself to stop destroying things that make the world gentler." The rain pounded harder against the windows, like the sky itself was listening. Lila crossed her arms, trying to steady herself. "What happens if you lose everything?" He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both defiance and peace. "Then I finally find out who I am without it." For a moment she couldn't speak. The sound of the rain filled the silence between them, and something unspoken pulsed beneath it, fragile and human. She finally said, "You can't fix this in one night." "Maybe not," he said, stepping closer. "But I can start tonight." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document, already damp from the rain. "The original redevelopment deed. Patrick doesn't know I took it." Lila frowned. "You stole from your own company." "I took back what was stolen first." He placed the paper on the counter. "If I file this withdrawal by morning, the demolition gets delayed 30 days. That's enough time to make a legal case if I can prove the cafe holds cultural value." Her eyes widened. "So you mean like a historic site?" He nodded. "It's a long shot, but it's possible." Lila shook her head, half in disbelief, half in awe. "Why would you risk everything for this?" Adrian hesitated, his gaze steady on her. "Because it's not about this place anymore. It's about the person I became here." For a second, neither of them moved. The air between them thickened, the kind of silence that holds too much meaning to be broken easily. Lila lowered her voice. "You don't even know me." He smiled sadly. "I know enough. I know you've built more goodness in this small cafe than most people build in an entire life. I know you treat every customer like they matter. I know you've been saving your tips to put Theo through school. And I know that every time you talk about this place, your eyes look like light, even when everything else feels dark." Tears pricked her eyes. "You shouldn't notice those things. I can't help it anymore," he said softly. "You taught me to see them." The words lingered, trembling in the space between them. Then, unexpectedly, Lila laughed through her tears. "You really don't make this easy, do you?" He tilted his head. "Would you prefer I stayed the villain?" Her eyes met his. "At least villains don't break your heart by trying to do the right thing." The honesty in her voice hit him harder than any boardroom argument ever could. Before he could answer, thunder rolled outside. The lights flickered, and the cafe went dark except for the dim glow from the street lamps outside. Lila found a flashlight under the counter and clicked it on, the beam catching the rain-streaked windows. Hadrian's face looked carved in shadow and gold. "Looks like we're staying here a while," she murmured. He smiled faintly. "Good. I've got 30 days to plan a revolution." She couldn't help but smile back, though her heart was a storm of its own. They sat across from each other in the quiet, the document between them like an unspoken promise. After a while, she asked softly, "What happens if you win?" He looked at her, his expression gentler now. "Then I find out if there's still something worth staying for." Lila turned away, pretending to check the door locks. "You don't need to say things like that." "I'm not saying them," he said quietly. "I'm living them." Her hand froze on the doorknob. She wanted to believe him desperately, but she'd lived too long in a world where words dissolved once the lights came on. When she finally looked back at him, his eyes were fixed on the deed, his reflection fractured in the lamplight. He looked like a man at war, and not with the board, not with the city, but with himself. And somewhere deep inside, she knew he was losing, and that she would be the reason he'd risk everything anyway. Outside, the storm showed no sign of stopping. Inside, neither did he. The storm raged through the night, and by morning, the streets were glistening with puddles that reflected the dull grey sky. Lila arrived early, as always, and found the cafe door already unlocked. Adrian was inside. He hadn't left. He stood near the window, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled, surrounded by a pile of files and documents spread across 2 tables. He looked less like a billionaire now and more like a man rebuilding himself from the ruins. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she said, placing her bag on the counter. He looked up with a tired smile. "I used to think sleep was a waste of time. Now I just can't." She nodded toward the paperwork. "All that's for your case." "Our case," he corrected. "The cafe needs more than emotion. It needs proof. History, community ties, signatures. I'm filing the petition at noon." Lila crossed her arms, her voice hesitant. "And if it doesn't work?" He met her eyes. "Then I lose the company." The words were calm, but they hung in the air like thunder that hadn't struck yet. Before she could answer, the door opened and Patrick Reeve walked in. He wasn't smiling this time. 2 lawyers followed him, their presence sharp and sterile against the cafe's worn charm. "Morning, Adrian," Patrick said smoothly. "You do love your little rebellions, don't you?" Adrian's expression hardened. "You're trespassing." Patrick ignored him. "I'm delivering a formal notice. The board's motion to remove you as acting CEO is under review. You've made quite a spectacle of yourself." Lila froze. "Remove you?" Patrick turned toward her, his gaze calculated. "The reason for all this, Miss Lila," she said coldly. He smiled thinly. "Of course. The waitress who turned our golden boy into a saint. Tell me, Lila, how does it feel to have a man throw away an empire for a cup of coffee and a cause no one cares about?" Adrian took a step forward. "You're out of line." Patrick's smirk didn't fade. "I'm out of patience. This cafe closes in 72 hours. You can either walk away quietly or you can go down with it." Lila's voice shook, but her words didn't. "Maybe you should sit down and have some coffee, Mr. Reeve. You might remember what being human feels like." Patrick blinked, startled for the first time. Then he laughed, a sound as hollow as the rain outside. "You really have changed him," he said to Adrian. "Pity it won't last." He placed a folder on the table and left, the lawyers trailing behind. The bell above the door jingled like an afterthought. Adrian stared at the folder. It was a termination draft, legal, airtight, merciless. Lila approached slowly. "Can they really do that?" He nodded. "They can try." "Then what are you going to do?" He looked up at her, his jaw set. "Fight harder." There was no hesitation, no performance in his tone. Just truth. The hours that followed were a blur of action. Adrian called journalists, reached out to local historians, even spoke to former employees who remembered the cafe from decades ago. He was everywhere at once, demanding, persuasive, alive. Lila watched him work, part in awe, part in fear. He was a man used to commanding empires, yet here he was, drafting petitions with ink-stained fingers, explaining zoning laws to baristas, asking customers for signatures with quiet humility. By mid-afternoon, The counter was covered with papers filled with names. Regulars, neighbors, delivery drivers. Even Theo's mother had signed. When Adrian handed her the last page, Lila felt her throat tighten. "You did this?" He shook his head. "We did." For a moment she let herself look at him, really look. The exhaustion, the resolve, the faint hope hiding behind his eyes. "You don't even realize what you're doing, do you?" she said softly. He frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're turning into the man you were meant to be all along." He smiled faintly. "Then I owe that to you." "Don't say that," she whispered. "Don't make me your reason." But it was too late. They both felt it, that fragile line between gratitude and love, between redemption and need. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the espresso machine. Then the door opened again. This time, it wasn't Patrick. It was a woman in her 60s dressed in a neat grey coat, holding a framed photograph. "Are you the owner?" she asked. Adrian straightened. "I am." The woman smiled gently. "Then this belongs to you. My husband helped build this place back in the 70s. He always said it was the heart of the block. He passed last year. I found this photo yesterday." She placed it on the counter. A black and white image of the cafe under construction. The same neon sign being lifted into place by two men, one of them smiling broadly at the camera. Adrian traced the edge of the photo with his finger. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That cafe fed people who couldn't afford to eat," the woman added. "You save it, and you're saving more than a business." When she left, the weight of her words lingered in the air. Lila whispered, "That's your proof. Cultural heritage, community impact." Adrian looked at her, a slow realization dawning in his eyes. "We have what we need." They worked through the evening preparing the final file. At exactly 10 o'clock, Adrian closed the folder, exhaled, and smiled for the first time that day. "It's ready," he said. "We'll submit it first thing tomorrow." Lila smiled back, weary but hopeful. "And then what?" He hesitated. "Then we wait." She nodded, the exhaustion finally catching up with her. When she turned to leave, Adrian said quietly, "Lila." She looked back. "I meant what I said before. I'm not staying here for redemption. I'm staying because I don't know how to walk away from you anymore." Her breath caught. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the streets glistening under the lamplight. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She just whispered, "Good night." Adrian and left before he could see the tears in her eyes. He stood alone again in the empty cafe, the photograph of the old sign gleaming faintly under the hanging light. And for the first time, he realized that fighting for the cafe wasn't just saving a building, it was saving the part of himself that had learned how to love. The morning came, cloaked in tension. The city was still damp from the night rain, its streets humming with early traffic, but inside the cafe, time seemed suspended. Lila arrived to find Adrian already there, suit pressed, eyes sharp, but his hands trembling slightly as he reviewed the petition one last time. He looked up when she entered, and for a fleeting second the weight lifted. "You came," he said softly. "Of course I did," she replied, hanging her coat on the rack. "You're not doing this alone." He gave a small nod. But there was something deeper behind his silence, a quiet fear that everything they'd built in the past few days could vanish with one corporate vote. They walked together to the downtown civic office, where the hearing would take place. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing as Adrian Cole, the billionaire who'd once been the face of ruthless capitalism, arrived carrying a file of community petitions and a waitress by his side. Patrick Reeve was already there, standing beside two board lawyers. His smirk was cold, professional. "You're really doing this, huh?" Adrian stopped in front of him. "I'm doing what you never had the courage to. Stand for something that doesn't make me richer." Patrick's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "And when the board removes you today, Adrian, what will you stand on then?" "On what's right," Adrian said quietly. "And maybe that's finally enough." Lila watched him, a strange calm filling her chest. He wasn't performing. He wasn't defending his ego. He was fighting from the heart. Inside, the hearing began. A panel of city officials reviewed the petition as Adrian presented his case, his voice steady but threaded with emotion. "This cafe," he began, holding up the old black and white photo, "was built before most of my company's skyscrapers. It fed workers when the city shut down. It's where generations gathered, where kindness was currency before profit was. He paused, glancing toward Lila in the back row. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that value isn't measured in quarterly reports. It's measured in people, and the way we choose to treat them. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Even the board lawyers looked uneasy. When the panel finally adjourned for deliberation, Adrian sat beside Lila in the hallway. The air thick with nerves. "You were incredible in there," she said. He smiled faintly. "I was honest. I think that's what scared them the most." She laughed softly, the sound easing something inside him. "You've changed." He turned to her, his eyes soft. "You made that possible." Before she could reply, Patrick emerged from a side room, phone in hand. His expression was unreadable. "They're reconvening," he said flatly. "Oh, you might want to hear this." Everyone filed back into the chamber. The lead councilwoman, a stern woman in her 50s, stood at the front holding the petition. After reviewing the submitted evidence, she began, including the community's testimonies and historical documentation. "We find that the establishment known as the Café qualifies for temporary cultural preservation status." Lila gasped quietly. "The final review for permanent designation will take place within 60 days, the woman continued. "Until then, all demolition or redevelopment plans are legally suspended." Applause broke out in the room. Reporters rushed to capture Adrian's reaction, but he didn't speak. He just turned toward Lila, his eyes shining with something far more powerful than victory. They walked outside together into the morning light. The city noise roared around them, but for a moment it was just the two of them on the steps, the world holding still. Lila's voice trembled. "You did it. We did," he corrected softly. She smiled, but her eyes betrayed something else, fear maybe, or longing she didn't want to name. Before she could answer, a camera flash went off and then another. Reporters surrounded them instantly. "Mr. Cole, what does this mean for Cole Industries? Are you stepping down as CEO? Is it true this waitress influenced your decision?" Lila stepped back instinctively, the noise closing in. Adrian saw it, the way her shoulders tensed, her eyes darting for escape. Without thinking, he reached for her hand, steadying her. "She didn't influence my decision," he said to the cameras. "She reminded me what decisions are supposed to mean," the press murmured. Some smiled. Others typed furiously, but Lila barely heard them. All she could feel was his hand around hers, strong, warm, protective. When the crowd finally thinned, she exhaled shakily. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." She looked up at him, the morning sun catching the edge of his hair. "Adrian, this changes everything. The media, the board, they're going to destroy you for this." He smiled faintly. "Then let them. Maybe I need to be broken down to build something real." For the first time, she didn't argue. She just stood there, watching him with the quiet ache of someone who wanted to believe in a man who finally believed in himself. But even as they shared that fragile peace, Patrick stood across the street watching. His phone buzzed, a message from the board's legal team. "Board counsel, proceed with emergency vote. Remove him before 5 p.m. By late afternoon, the city was alive with headlines. "Billionaire saves Café from demolition." "Adrian Cole defies his own board." The story spread faster than any press release Cole Industries had ever written. But inside the glass towers of his company, celebration wasn't on the agenda. Mutiny was. Adrian's executive office, usually filled with polished silence, now buzzed with tension. Patrick stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the skyline as the board's emergency meeting began behind him. The others sat around the long marble table, 12 directors, each wearing the look of people who smelled blood in the water. "Mr. Cole," the chairwoman began crisply, "the board has reviewed your actions over the last 72 hours. You've violated fiduciary duty, compromised investor confidence, and used company funds to interfere with corporate assets. We have no choice but to call a vote of removal." Adrian didn't flinch. "You're removing me for protecting something human. Fine, but remember this. Every skyscraper we've built means nothing if the foundation underneath it is hollow." Patrick turned from the window, arms crossed. "Save the poetry, Adrian. The shareholders don't want a philosopher. They want profit." Adrian's gaze hardened. "Profit isn't the opposite of decency." Patrick's smirk returned, but thinner now, stretched over unease. You sound like her. The words hit harder than intended. Adrian straightened. If that's the insult you think it is, you've already lost. The vote proceeded. One by one, hands raised around the table. 10 in favor, 2 against. Patrick spoke last, his voice measured, with regret. High vote, yes, it was done. Adrian stood, buttoning his jacket with slow, deliberate calm. Then you'll get what you wanted, Patrick. But understand this, you can own every brick I built. You'll never own the reason I built them. He walked out before anyone could speak. The elevator doors closed on the boardroom's reflection. A world he'd once ruled now shrinking behind glass. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with reporters. Adrian ignored them all, stepping into the rain without an umbrella. The air was cold, but it felt clean, like something had been stripped from him that he'd never truly needed. He drove without direction until the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and blue. And when the road narrowed, he realized where he'd gone. The cafe. It was still open, faint light glowing through the rain. Lila stood inside, laughing softly with a customer as she wiped down a table. The sight of her, simple, alive, real, hit him harder than any board vote ever could. He hesitated outside, drenched again, watching her through the glass. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. He'd built empires out of words, but none of them could cross that small distance between them. Then Lila looked up. Her expression shifted from surprise to something deeper, relief maybe, or the ache of recognition. She walked to the door and opened it, letting the rain spill in around them. You're soaked, she said softly. He smiled faintly. Seems to happen every time I come here. She noticed the absence of his usual composure. What happened? They removed me, he said simply. Her breath caught. Adrian, I'm so sorry. Don't be, he said. They can have the company. I think I just got my soul back. She didn't know how to respond. So she did what she always did. She poured him a cup of coffee. They sat together in silence for a long while, the hum of the rain filling the quiet spaces between them. The world outside was chaos, but in that little cafe, time seemed to soften. Finally, Lila spoke. What will you do now? He stared into his cup, steam curling against the light. I don't know. For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan. Maybe that's the point, she said gently. Maybe plans are what got you lost in the first place. He looked up at her, and something in his expression shifted, a mix of admiration and longing. You really believe that, don't you? That life's about more than winning? She smiled. It's about being. About showing up even when everything's falling apart. He leaned back, watching her, his heart quiet for the first time in years. You make it sound easy. It isn't, she said softly. But it's worth it. The door opened again. Theo ran in, his backpack bouncing. Lila, look! He held up a newspaper clipping of Adrian's photo at the hearing. You're both on the front page. Lila blushed. Oh, Theo, that's not exactly... But Adrian smiled and crouched beside the boy. You keeping that dragon safe? Theo nodded proudly. He guards the cafe every night. Adrian looked up at Lila. Seems to be working. When Theo ran off again, Lila turned back to him. You didn't have to come back here. Yes, he said, I did. This is where everything real began. She exhaled, the words catching in her throat. Adrian, I don't know what this is between us, but... He stood, stepping closer until the space between them was charged, fragile. Then don't name it, he said quietly. Just feel it. She tried to look away, but his voice held her. I've spent years building walls, he said. You're the first person who ever saw through them. And now that you have... I can't go back to who I was. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Adrian... He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers trembling slightly. I'm not asking for forever. Just for this moment to mean something. She could have stepped away. She could have reminded him of everything still broken. Everything they couldn't fix. But instead, she whispered, it already does. And when he kissed her, it wasn't the kind of kiss that demanded or promised. It was quiet, human, and full of everything he'd forgotten how to feel. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Inside, 2 lives, one built on power, one on kindness, found something that money could never buy. But as their lips parted, headlights swept across the window. A black car stopped in front of the cafe. Patrick stepped out, umbrella in hand, phone to his ear. Lila saw him first. Adrian, What is he doing here? Adrian's expression hardened, ending something he shouldn't have started. Patrick entered without waiting for permission. His voice was smooth, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. You're a hard man to ruin, Adrian. Guess I stopped making it easy. Patrick sighed. The board may have fired you, but you're still a shareholder. That makes you dangerous. I came to make you an offer. Walk away quietly, sell your stake, and you can still leave with your dignity. Adrian looked at him, calm but unyielding. You really don't get it, do you? Dignity isn't what I lost. It's what I finally found. Patrick's jaw tightened. Then you'll burn everything down for this woman? Adrian glanced at Lila, then back at him. No, I'll burn it down for what she made me remember. Patrick hesitated, his mask slipping for just a moment, envy flickering through his eyes. You've changed, he muttered. Adrian's reply was simple. That's the point. Patrick turned to leave, his voice colder now. Then you'd better hope she's worth it. When the door closed behind him, Lila turned to Adrian. You just made an enemy. He smiled faintly. No, I just stopped pretending he was a friend. Outside, thunder rumbled again, but this time, neither of them looked away. The storm wasn't over. But for the first time, Adrian Cole wasn't afraid to face it. As he lowered the phone, his reflection caught in the cafe window across the street. And for the first time, his smirk faded. Because deep down, he knew the tide had shifted. Adrian Cole wasn't the same man he'd once been, and that made him more dangerous than ever. The next day dawned with a silence that felt heavy, like the city was holding its breath. News outlets buzzed with speculation, some praising Adrian Cole for standing up to greed, others calling him reckless, unfit, broken. But inside the Lark Cafe, everything was still. The smell of roasted beans, the soft hum of the old ceiling fan, the faint clink of ceramic cups. Life continued, unbothered by the chaos beyond its doors. Lila stood behind the counter, watching the morning light stretch through the windows. She'd barely slept. The night before their kiss, Patrick's intrusion, the unspoken future between them, replayed in her mind in endless loops. Then she heard the door. Adrian stepped in quietly, without his usual presence of command. No chauffeur, no tailored perfection. Just a man in rolled-up sleeves, hair unkempt, eyes full of something softer than she'd ever seen. You're early, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled faintly. I didn't sleep much. Neither did I. He came closer, setting his phone face down on the counter. The board's meeting again today. They're offering to buy me out completely. And will you take it? He shook his head slowly. No, I'm not selling what's left of me. There was silence, and a shared one, thick with both fear and respect. Lila looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, You don't have to fight forever, Adrian. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It's peace. He nodded, but his eyes didn't waver. I know. But if I walk away now, I want it to be towards something, not from it. Lila's heart twisted. And what would that be? He met her gaze. You! The word hung in the air, not as a confession, but as a truth that had been waiting to be spoken. She blinked back tears. You can't build a life around someone who served you coffee. He smiled gently. No, but I can build one with her. The words sank deep, cutting through the last of her resistance. For the first time, she saw him not as the man who had once owned the world, but as the man who had learned how to lose it gracefully. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a folded paper. It's the deed, he said. I signed it over to you this morning. The cafe is yours, she froze. What? No, Adrian, I can't accept this. Yes, you can. This place saved me. I'm just giving it back to the person who gave it life. Her hands trembled as she held the paper. You'll lose everything. He smiled faintly. Then I'll finally be free. Tears welled in her eyes. You can't just disappear like this. I'm not disappearing, he said softly. I'm starting over. She stepped closer, anger and grief tangled in her voice. You think that's noble, but it isn't. You're running away from what you could be, from what we could be. He looked at her, his voice breaking slightly. Lila, I love you. That's the only reason I can walk away. You showed me that love isn't ownership. It's release. She shook her head, tears falling now. Don't you dare turn this into a goodbye. He smiled sadly. It's not. It's a promise that when I come back, it'll be as the man you believed I could be. The door opened behind them, and Maggie peeked in, carrying fresh pastries. She froze at the sight of them, the paper, the tears, the silence that spoke louder than words. "Should I come back later?" she asked gently. Lila nodded without turning. "Yeah, Maggie. Just a minute." Maggie slipped out quietly, leaving the two of them alone again. Adrian glanced once more around the cafe, the cracked tiles, the fading menu board, the corner table where Theo's dragon still sat, and exhaled. "I used to think legacy was about how many buildings had my name. Now I think it's about how many hearts remember what I tried to fix." Lila's lips trembled. "You already fixed mine." He smiled, and for a moment neither moved. Then he leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. The world seemed to still. "I'll come back," he whispered. "I'll hold you to that," she whispered back. When he pulled away, his eyes were wet, but his smile was real. He picked up his coat, hesitated at the door, and turned one last time. "Take care of our place," and then he was gone. The bell above the door chimed softly, once, twice, and then the sound faded into quiet. Lila stood there for a long time, the morning light pouring through the windows, the paper shaking in her hands. She unfolded the deed again, tracing his signature at the bottom. Beneath it in his handwriting was a single line, "For the woman who taught me that love is worth more than legacy." She pressed a hand over her mouth, sobbing quietly, not from sadness, but from the kind of love that doesn't need to be owned to be eternal. Outside, the world went on, cars passing, people laughing, life resuming. But inside the cafe, something sacred remained, the echo of redemption, the scent of coffee and rain, and the memory of a man who finally learned that wealth means nothing without heart. Lila turned the open sign to "Closed for today." She brewed one last cup, poured it into his favorite mug, and placed it on the corner table. Then she whispered, "You'll find your way back." And somewhere in the city, under the same sky that watched them both, Adrian Cole walked into the light, no longer a billionaire, but finally a man. Subscribe if you believe that love still changes people.